Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Kelly. I'm the program coordinator at Rochester Hills Public Library. Welcome to this afternoon's Art Talk, Contemporary Realism, brought to you in partnership with Paint Creek Center for the Arts and presented by Mary Dudek. Our next program will be on August 11th. It will be another Art Talk, also brought to you in partnership with PCCA. And that program will be about painterly realism and post-war American art. So you can register for that online at calendar.rhpl.org. That's going to be in about 3 weeks from now. The program tonight will be recorded. It'll be available on our website or on our YouTube page in about 1 week from tonight. Please note for the program tonight that audience members will be muted throughout the duration of the program. You can feel free to leave any and all questions during the presentation in the chat, and afterwards we will have a Q&A section which I will moderate, and I will present those questions to Mary for you. And then finally, I would like to take this time to thank the Friends of the Rochester Hills Public Library for their many fundraising efforts which help make programs like this possible. But with all of that said, I will go ahead and introduce Nicole Busch, who is going to help us introduce our presenter and the program tonight. So Nicole Busch, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole, and I am the Art Education Manager at Paint Creek Center for the Arts. I'm really excited to introduce Mary Dudek to you tonight. She's an artist who specializes in sacred fine art. And while she primarily studies figure sculpting, she also works with drawing, painting, ceramics, and metal. Her true passion is creating beautiful figures designed to bring the viewer closer to God. And just in her teachings at Paint Creek, you can see just how amazing she is and her skills and her knowledge. She has studied drawing and sculpture at the Studio Art Center International in Florence, Italy, and earned her BFA from the University of Michigan Stantz School of Art and Design. In addition to her work in commissions, she teaches a variety of art classes and workshops. So I've seen firsthand how amazing she is, and I'm really excited for you to get to know a little bit of her knowledge tonight.
All right, thanks so much, Nicole. Appreciate it. Thank you very, very, very much. I'm really excited to I'm very excited to share a little bit about this topic that I think is so important, and I'm really passionate about it. It excites me a lot as an artist. So without further ado, contemporary realism. I'm going to share my screen with you and dive right in. All right, so contemporary realism, an interesting term we use to describe realist artists of today. All right, so what is contemporary realism? Contemporary realism is it's a modern art movement. It's a modern art movement that was formed mostly in response and defiance, primarily, to abstract expressionism. More on abstract expressionism in a little bit, but this movement is a form of neoclassicism or a return to the classical. It signifies returning to a straightforward approach to art making and a realistic depiction of the subject. So most common subjects include figures, the one we see here by Laura Tundell, figures, people, portraits, mostly done from life, inspired by life and supplemented with photos, master copies, and anatomical studies, landscapes like we see in this painting here, and still life subjects. So basically all the kind of classical, you might consider old school themes of art, portraits, landscapes, still life, kind of making this resurgence in the art scene. So the principles and techniques of contemporary realists borrow heavily from 19th century academic realism, which was a movement really focused on the technical excellence and rigorous study and practice, depicting the subject realistically versus ideally. It was kind of the idea of the 19th century academies. The academies of the 19th century, mostly in France and kind of spreading throughout the rest of Europe, like I said, all male academies and very rigorous. It would be morning, afternoon, night, Monday through Friday, work on the weekends, and get really, really good at figurative study with drawing, with painting, with sculpture, studying the work of the masters. So students would study from life, as we kind of see in this little photo, this picture of all these guys at their easels and the live model in the middle. Rigorous study of the model from life. That was a cornerstone of the academies, as well as things like master copies, like this guy, master copies from people who came ahead of time, another 19th century drawing, so from the live model, and plaster casts, statues like this one. This was from a marble statue, and cadavers. The technical rigor of the academic institutions would prepare artists to compete for prizes in worldwide competitions. So they would study at school so that they could get really, really good, so that they could go and enter their work and compete in large-scale competitions like the Prix de Rome or the Grand Prix, which is a French scholarship competition. And it was the most prestigious award. If you won the Grand Prix, it was the most prestigious award you could get at the time in architecture, art, or composition, musical composition, that is. And winners, if they won, they would be awarded time to study in Rome. And when they completed their studies in Rome, they would be basically among the most influential artists of the culture. Kind of everything they touched would be gold at that time. Their word went for what was kind of in vogue with the art scene. So this piece was done by William Adolf Bougierau, who's a very famous artist. I'm going to show a couple more of his pieces in just a minute. This was his winning piece at the Prix de Rome in 1950. He shared the win with Paul Baudry, who was one of his contemporaries, and the scene depicts Zenobia, Queen Zenobia, who's this story about her is that she's washed up on these river banks and taken in by these shepherds. She's like this powerful queen, and the legend goes her husband as king was scared, worried that their enemies were going to try to attack her, so he tried to kill her first in order to prevent worse things from happening to her, and he throws her body in the river, and her body washes up, and she's like nursed back to health by these shepherds. After that, she rises up to power. So she's kind of like this powerful warrior queen. So the kind of work that would be produced by these masters, these winners of the Prix de Rome, was because they had the skills that they learned in the academy, skills that they could use on larger projects and commissions of more allegorical characters and stories, like we see in this one by Bougierau. This is one of the more famous ones you might recognize from Bougierau if you've gotten a calendar or a Christmas card or something like this. These are some of the most famous iconographic pieces that you'd recognize from Bougierau. But yeah, basically, you go to the academy, you get really, really good at figure drawing, you get really, really good at figure sculpture and figure painting, so that you can do the work that is more allegorical, be it about Greek mythology or stories or legends or themes from the Bible, etc. So, but today, contemporary realist schools and artists will classify themselves as it's a couple of different things. You might hear them calling themselves classical, traditional, or just plain old realistic. They're realists. And their studies and their work is inspired not just by the 19th century academies and artists, but by artists who qualify basically as anyone depicting subjects accurately, including artists such as from the Renaissance and the Baroque time period, like Titian or Da Vinci. This is a piece by Titian. It's actually at the DIA. And so yeah, straightforward approach to painting, to the subject, to the figure. Although, I mean, with the Renaissance, there are lots of elements of romanticism and idealism that's caught up in there, but for the most part, it's about realism. So the philosophy is that with realism, before I get into what came before contemporary realism, is that the academic training is going to be the thing that makes you a better artist. And that if you have a realistic subject matter, that is going to be making a powerful message that will resonate with the viewer and relate to the viewer strongly due to the artistic, realistic approach. It's founded really on empathy more than anything, and the belief and the idea that the viewer will relate to a subject that's recognizable better than an abstract piece of art. Therefore, artists attempt to refine, master their study and abilities to capture the truth of a subject, such as the anatomy, the gesture, the proportions, lighting, colors, flesh tones, hair, placement of the subject in space or on the canvas, and things like what's in focus versus what's a little bit farther away. You'll see kind of soft edges versus hard edges in painting, trying to capture as if you were really looking at something. Facial expressions. So the artists use all these elements to create a mood or a sense to the work to aid the message of the overall piece. So like I said earlier, that contemporary realism was formed pretty much, it kind of rode on the heels of abstract expressionism. And it was formed mostly as a criticism, as a response, and sort of a defiance to abstract expressionism. So, abstract expressionism started around the 60s, the 70s, and came out in New York. So it came out as a response to abstract expressionism. I'm sorry, no. Abstract expressionism came out of the 40s and 50s. Contemporary realism was 60s and 70s. Pardon me. So abstract expressionism is about creating work depicting an emotional expression. These expressions could be very subjective in nature, and they emphasize personal experience or personal truth versus objective reality. So the work went away from realism, quite literally, showing things as they are, to showing, kind of trying to capture feeling, trying to capture mood primarily with the work. Some of the themes artists would emphasize, the work would focus on the act of painting, like as if it were a performance or a happening sometimes, like the fact that I'm making a painting is the art versus the painting itself. And so some leading examples are the ones that we see here, like Jackson Pollock, all of his work, and or Willem de Kooning around the same time period. So these guys, again, it's about line, it's about energy, it's about shape, it's about color. Yes, composition is a part of that. It's about creating a feeling, whether you're looking at the Jackson Pollock or the de Kooning piece or any of his work. They're trying to create a feeling, essentially, versus an objective message. In abstract expressionism, it's the elements of art. It's the color, the line, texture, pattern, shape, contrast, scale, even just how big something is. They make very, very large pieces, are very much the highlight of the work, as opposed to these elements being used for a means to an end. So with realism, the elements of art are used for a specific purpose, i.e. to depict a specific subject, tell a specific story, like Zenobia, for instance, versus with the abstract expressionist art, it's about the elements. It's about highlighting those elements. Kind of like a microscope, zooming in on an organism to show you the cellular structure. You back away and you'd see that you've got a leaf under the microscope, but in abstract expressionism, we're zooming so far in where you can't tell it's a leaf necessarily. We're focusing on one tiny little aspect of it. So, one can make the argument that kind of art qualifies even more as design instead of fine art. You might kind of ask that. But with abstract expressionism, the idea and the argument behind it is that there is significance in the work. It's just simply more apparent to the artist. The focus of abstract expressionism is that it's self-revelatory. It's something that's depicting the psychology of the artist. The idea is kind of being like, I'm doing this piece for me. I don't really care too much if other people get it or relate to it. I do, and I'm the artist. Another notable abstract expressionist from that era is Jasper Johns. He's most famous for his flag series. He would paint the American flag. He would also paint maps. He would paint targets. He kind of got into this phase of painting recognizable symbols. So he used the American flag as his subject, basically commenting on the idea not of abstracting something, but using something pre-existing, remarking, as he would say, what's interesting to me is the fact that it isn't designed but taken. So as opposed to promoting a message with the piece, he's interested not in the work, but simply the idea of doing something. I'm depicting the American flag as my art. That's an interesting art message to say. Designs that already exist. So ideas like his really paved the way for Dada and pop art with Andy Warhol, who took it a step further with his soup can and Marilyn Monroe kind of focusing even more in on that pre-made idea. So anyway, so back to contemporary realism. So abstract expressionism comes out in 40s and 50s. It's getting its beginnings in the 30s, and it's like the hot art movement of the day. Everyone's doing it, and these guys get famous. They're noticed. They're talked about in the exhibitions and the magazines and such. And their ideas and the things that they promote and their kind of methodology is what's getting really, really promoted heavily in the greater scene of art and in the academies and the institutions and the universities as well. So contemporary realism, like I said, rides on the heels of abstract expressionism. And contemporary realism is formed as a response, basically by a group of painters who kind of say, I see what you're doing there, and I don't want to do it anymore. So contemporary realism, kind of at the end of abstract expressionism, comes out, is formed by a group of artists who qualify themselves as second generation abstract expressionists, who kind of began with abstract expression or abstract work really, and then after that started depicting realistic work, kind of decided to go back to the traditional types of art like still life, landscape, portrait, etc. Notable painters like that include Jane Freilicher, and like this piece that you can see in here. So she kind of started more abstract expressionist and started making her way back toward realistic subjects. This painting table. You can kind of see in this painting the elements of abstract art. A lot of the subjects are pretty flat. The perspective is questionable. She's kind of breaking the rules of traditional art. There are certain proportions are incorrect, but we're still objectively depicting a scene as it is. She's not abstracting it that far. This is a far cry from Picasso. So you can kind of see it, we're starting to take steps back toward realism. Another artist in that time is Jack Beale. Jack Beale graduated from the Chicago Art Institute in 1956 as an abstract expressionist, and since then has become a dedicated realist painter, caring greatly for the ideals of goodness, of beauty, of truth, of objective things that you can measure from a piece. He's inspired mostly and heavily by 17th century Dutch painters and the Renaissance. His 1977 painting of his is a self-portrait with hat titled Envy. Again, you can kind of see that there's a style to it. Certainly the hat with the texture, that there's something, this is not a photograph. This is not something photorealistic. He's kind of making it a little stylized, a little over dramatic with how he does the flesh in the hand and the stripes in the hat. But it's decidedly real, a lot closer to realism than it is abstraction. You'd have to bend it pretty far to make this piece abstract. So these people are kind of the founders of contemporary realism. Like I said, so contemporary realism is basically formed as a criticism and rejection of abstract work or subjective subject matter, and a return to objective, measurable, truth, technical excellence. I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that my proportions are correct, that this is flesh tone, etc. So where do we see contemporary realism today? Well, we see it all over the place, really. We see it in New York, we see it in Europe, and in a lot of small, almost fringe schools, you could say, in the United States and all over the world. Small school academies and ateliers are kind of been springing up all over the place. They're not necessarily giant, massive institutions. It's not like a university that's going to have hundreds of thousands of students. They're a lot on the smaller scale. Contemporary realism today feels almost like an underground art movement, like it's kind of known only by those already in it. Yet, when you start looking around, you see that the work and the number of artists connected with it and in making realistic art today really vastly outnumbers the number of artists in any other public field of fine art. And you kind of find out it mostly due to social media, that because of things like Facebook, like Instagram, that people can find out more about these academies and these small little organizations that do contemporary realism that promote these ideas. One of the top contemporary realist institutions and kind of one of the leaders of the scene of contemporary realism is the Florence Academy of Art. The Florence Academy was founded in 1995 by a man named Daniel Graves, who's alive today, and with the mission to provide the highest level of instruction in classical methods of drawing, painting, and sculpture for students wishing to pursue careers as professional artists in the realist tradition. So at this school, it's an American institution in Florence, so the language is, all the instruction is in English, but they cater to students from all over the world, really. And they're positioned in Florence so that students can study from the masters. They can be surrounded by the high art of the Renaissance while they're taking their studies in class. Students who go to this school can graduate after 3 years with a certificate in figure drawing, figure painting, or figure sculpture. Nothing else. There's no graphic design, there's no film, there's no photography. It's drawing, it's painting, it's sculpture, and that is it. And you will get to be a good artist, and that's kind of the guarantee. They've got a method of teaching that pretty much guarantees success. The Academy, in addition to their 3-year program, provides summer programs, and they have got campuses in Florence, Sweden, London, and the United States. And the Florence Academy of Art campus in America is in New Jersey. And also they're constantly expanding. Their alumni go forward and they teach in all kinds of places as well, and they'll promote those. Recently I saw workshops in California and other parts of the East Coast. And so their alumni will also lead workshops all over the world, really. But they'll start at Florence, at the birthplace of Michelangelo, where he spent the majority of his time studying, and go forward from there, pretty much kind of following in his tradition. Notable alumni include sculptor Eduardo de Juana Goris. This is one of his pieces in clay. He graduated from the Florence Academy of Art in 2015. He taught there until 2018 before moving back to his hometown in Madrid to start his own studio and work on his commissions. He travels throughout the US and Europe mostly, but I've seen him do workshops in places like Morocco and such. And he exhibits his work internationally as well as is collected internationally. Started at the Academy, pursued realism, and now his work is taking on well, you could argue very contemporary vibe sort of thing. He's sort of getting into this a deconstructionist sort of looking at the clay, leaving it unfinished in places. Certain areas brought up to a high level of detail, high level of realism, like you can see on the rib cage, like you can see on the knee, on the shoulder. And then other parts he's letting it seem almost like an abandoned building, like time has aged the sculpture. Taking on that, well, you could argue very, very modern, very contemporary flair to it. Another leader of the contemporary art movement is the Art Renewal Center. The Art Renewal Center it's not a school, but it's an organization. It's founded in 1999, at least I'm pretty sure that's when it was founded. It's a little hard to chase down their history. It's an organization founded to promote the return to skill-based training and standards of excellence in the visual arts. You kind of see with the Art Renewal Center, ARC as they're called, or anybody else who pursues this contemporary realist school of thought, a little bit of edge to their work. They're kind of like all or nothing. It's all realism or nothing. And they're very kind of critical of any other kind of art style or form, you could say. So these movements and these organizations are kind of brought up to be very, very specific, to be very single-minded in their pursuit and their education. So like I said, the organization is founded to promote the return to skill-based training and standards of excellence in the visual arts. So they exist to strengthen and unite realist artists in a community forum online through exhibitions. They provide resources for education for people wishing to increase their skills and knowledge. And they also provide scholarships, scholarship opportunities. They do competitions to give exposure and resources and money to people who wish to be established as contemporary realist artists. Down below is a picture, Embers, Ashes, and Saints, an oil painting by Eddie Head in a recent exhibition of theirs. With COVID, everything has been online with them, but I know that they their usual annual exhibition is in person. So they're kind of an endless source for inspiration with contemporary realism. They also have an image library on their website for finding references of the old masters. Another resource and kind of leader of the contemporary realist movement is the Elizabeth Greenshields Foundation, with their mission statement being that they have been contributing to the success and development of emerging artists from around the world since 1955. So they kind of sprang up in the midst of abstract expressionism. They were founded in 1955. And it was founded by a man named Charles Glass Greenshields, who is a Montreal lawyer, an amateur artist himself, who started the foundation in honor of his mother, Elizabeth. And it was founded on the belief that discipline, hard work, and serious training in traditional art were necessary for the growth and development of artists. So the endowment is a grant opportunity for people, for qualified individuals to pursue further study and work on their representational career. It's only eligible for people at the beginning of their art career, like if you're an established artist, you're not qualified to apply. Working exclusively in the fields of representational style, painting, drawing, sculpture, or printmaking. And they have to demonstrate to the foundation that their talent and their intention is to pursue a lifetime career in representational art practice. And they make it very, very clear on their website. They explain explicitly how they do not provide funding for the pursuit of abstract art there. So they're, again, very, very single-minded in their approach. Here's the work of one of their grantees, Stephen Assail, Bride with Cards. Their website is a wonderful resource to find other artists that are pursuing this representational style of art. Another one is the Grand Central Atelier. Grand Central Atelier was founded in New York, and still is in New York, by a group of artists who studied at an art studio by a man named Jacob Collins in 1990. And they were studying at his studio, and they decided that we want to start a school, basically, create a school for other people like us seeking to gain a classical art education inspired by the masters of the Renaissance, live model, anatomy studies, the skeleton, master copies, etc. And since then it's grown, it's become internationally known and reputed as a place for training in mastery and excellence in the arts. Here's an oil painting by its founder, Jake Collins. Again, a small school, you know, they're not a hundreds of thousands of students at their school kind of thing. They're, you know, maybe 10 students in a studio max at a time, but they're going to teach you to be a master in one of these ways. So a place like Grand Central Atelier and Florence Academy of Art, they're not teaching their students how to think necessarily. They're not trying to say you should be making art that's making a political statement, but what they care about is the technical skill behind the work, because that their whole point and their mission and goal is to provide students the technical training and mastery so that they can go forward and make art for larger purposes, just like the 19th century academies. Give you a strong technical foundation. From there, you can go forward and make whatever kind of statement you want. We're just going to give you the technical know-how to actually make that happen. So a place that kind of combines all of those, though, would be the New York Academy of Art. So the New York Academy is just a graduate school. It's not for undergrads. Graduate school focuses on intensive technical training combined with critical discourse. So a lot of critique, basically, and a lot of discussion around the work. So they believe that rigorously trained artists are most capable of communicating and achieving their artistic visions. So they believe their students will be most equipped to make art that has very contemporary or modern message or theme that's very relevant to people's lives if it is accompanied by a high level of technical skill. And this philosophy is really what all of contemporary art, contemporary realism is founded on. The idea that your craftsmanship and pursuit of a high level of craftsmanship is paramount. And it's going to be something that fuels, informs, and equips you to make art with a powerful statement. So here's an oil painting by one of their instructors, Steve Forster. And last but not least, before I go to the actually, never mind. Last but not least, where do you see it? Anyone pursuing realism today? People taking classes all over. They don't have to have a fancy university education, but people they group together, whether it's at Pink Creek or it's in New York or it's in California or if it's in Philadelphia. People find a way to get technically trained, and all those people qualify as contemporary realists. So that pretty much concludes my talk. I ended up a little sooner than I expected, but if you're interested in pursuing the idea of classical or contemporary realism, I teach classes on Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday to teach students, that give them the technical skill that they might need to go forth and be their own technical contemporary realists themselves. And you can see more of my work at my website at marydudekart.com and see if there's anything that you'd be interested in studying. So I'll open it up to questions now. Excellent. And I'd love to hear from you guys.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe again, and I am going to be moderating questions. We have quite a few, actually.
Great.
So we'll ask some. We actually got quite a few questions from Charles here, so I'm going to pick a couple of them, and if we have time, we might come back and answer a couple more. So I think first off, we have here, he says, one of the criticisms of contemporary academic realism is that it's reactionary. So there's kind of like a two-part question here. Do you think this art can really recapture the past? And do you think this is even an objective of contemporary realists?
So do you think it can capture the past?
Yeah, like recapture the past.
I don't think anything can truly recapture the past, but it references it strongly and kind of says, I want to have this be my backbone. So for instance, there are people that, there's an artist, his name is Ramon Furtado, actually, who's spent a lot of time researching and creating a curriculum to capture exactly 19th century realists. So people like him have basically started their own online schools. They're trying to figure out exactly how those academic 19th century realists did their work. So down to the paper, the type of paper, the type of charcoal that they used, the amount of time, the subject, the method. He's kind of done a lot of research, read a lot of books to try to nail down exactly how it was done so he could teach other people how to do it. So you could argue it's almost like a historical reenactment, as it were, of trying to figure out how people made art in that time and trying to do it oneself. So I think that's very interesting. That being said, can somebody trick you into thinking like that they're in the 19th century? I would argue no. Yeah, I don't think you can do that. You can probably make a very, very good realistic capturing, do a master copy. But for your own professional work, like I said, I think all you can do is really kind of borrow on the philosophy of it. What was the second part of that question?
Do you think that it is even an objective of the contemporary realists?
Oh, like something that would kind of like deter people from contemporary realism being like...
I think more is, do you think that is something they explicitly have in mind, or is it maybe a byproduct?
I think it's a byproduct. I think it's like people like me look at it and say, you did this because you didn't like that art movement. And so you're kind of saying, no, I want to do something else with my art instead. So I don't think they're explicitly coming out and saying, we are artists who are against abstract expressionism. But I would argue that if you look at the mission statements of some of these places, that it stands very, very much in kind of stark contrast of anything abstract. When places like the Elizabeth Greenshields Foundation that says explicitly, we don't fund abstract art, it's hard to not think that that's very much a reaction to any kind of form of abstract art around it. So is that kind of aware of being a motivation? Maybe partly. Mm-hmm. I would say partly. I can say for myself that as someone who consider herself a contemporary realist, that it's informed by the work I've seen the work of abstract artists, and while I love it very much, I've decided, that's not really the work that I want to do. So I'm not making my work in a way to, as like a war, as it were, but it's just kind of helps me to clarify my own artistic vision. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, there's so many factors that kind of go into play, especially once you start talking about like a whole movement. We have here from Laura. They know they were, I believe they're reacting to some of the questions here where they're like, no, I believe it's today's realism with hints of modernism. Some artists do show an influence from the past, things like the Renaissance period, though that's not the norm. So we kind of had the reactionary point of, them going against like kind of that like expressionist movement. And I'm curious, do you think that there are any particular other eras or movements of painting that you see them either clearly kind of hearkening back to in contemporary realism or strongly stepping back from or opposing?
Yeah. So like I said, they're very much contemporary realists or modern. I mean, as far as like you want to call it modern, I mean, semantics are, we could, talk about that. I think that's less important than the actual motives behind it. But anyways, contemporary realism is very much 19th century academies is what we're after, as well as the Renaissance. So Renaissance, high Renaissance, Baroque time period especially, that fueled the 19th century academies. Those are kind of the biggest points of borrowing from. And then other areas or types of art that it's reacting to and saying, no, I don't want to, would be, like I said, the abstract expressionism or abstract in general. Think Picasso with Cubism, things like that. So that anything kind of that would qualify as abstract, contemporary realism pretty much kind of stands in opposition to.
And in that,
I hope that clarifies.
In that kind of way, it sort of is forming its identity, but in like something of a reverse sense.
Sort of, as saying, I disagree with this philosophy, but I agree with this one, Mm. So like I said, it's that form of neoclassicism, of returning to something, of going back to kind of what came beforehand with the academic approach to portrait, to landscape, to still life, things like that.
All right. We also had another point. So like I said earlier, Charles notes that it's one of the criticisms is that it's very reactionary. He also asks, why do you think that contemporary realism in at least some sectors of the art criticism establishment isn't taken very seriously?
Oh, kind of like academically, like at the university level. I think it isn't necessarily taken seriously by academies. Well, I think everyone's got their bias for sure. And because it looks like it's been done before. So I've seen a lot. First, at university will see you trying to do realistic artwork and kind of say, okay, this has been done already. Where's the creativity? Where's the innovation in this? This sort of realistic method of art, with drawing, painting, sculpture. I've seen it before. I'm bored with it. And that's the feedback that I got in school when I was pursuing realistic art. I got a lot of people who are not interested. The professorial pressure was very much like, this has been done before. I'm not interested in something that looks like it's been done before. So that's why I think it's less promoted on the bigger academic spheres, say at your Rhode Island School of Art and Design, at your Yale, at your Michigan, or things like that. So that's my theory anyways.
I mean, that kind of pressure externally, I think it makes the people who really stick with it and say, no, there's something here. It kind of gives them a really strong passion for it.
It does indeed, which is why I think you see with so many of these contemporary realistic institutions, like I said, that strong kind of bite, that very much, no, we are anti-abstract. We are so far over here that we disagree. So I don't know, you could argue it's a little bit of a Capulet and Montague kind of going on between the art movements and the artists, or kind of how they view each other in a way.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody else who hasn't asked a question yet, feel free to pop in the chat and ask a question. I myself was personally curious. We see the contemporary realism movement popping up in the 60s and 70s, and also at this time, we're starting to see an ever-increasing accessibility for a broader range of people for photography. And, I assume, obviously, even today, for modern practitioners, you get a lot of people, we might say unwisely or unfavorably comparing the two. Do we see historically any kind of overlap between contemporary realism and photography, or any particular attempts in the movement to distinguish itself from photography? Like, we're creating realistic images, but it's different. Like, the methodology, the ideology is totally different. Is there anything like that?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Certainly also at that time, photorealism is becoming a thing too. And the philosophies and the ideas and the motivations behind photorealism is very fascinating. Certainly the technical skill is something that's awe-inspiring. And you look at something that is photorealistically painted and you go, oh my goodness, and kind of creating that sense of awe and wonder in the viewer is part of it, of not necessarily showing off, but trying to make an impact. And kind of overlap between that, or differentiation between how is it different is something you will see, or an argument against contemporary realism. You might say, be like, well, why don't you just take a picture? Well, with contemporary realism, the study of the figure from the live model, for instance, the study of anatomy, master copies, all of these things help and aid you as an artist to make art that is higher than what you see at an academic level. So basically stuff that's not student work. So like with Bougierau, for instance, the famous works that he did of the Blessed Mother with the child, with the infant Jesus and the angels, things like that, with the Pietà, that's his professional work. That's not stuff that he did in the studio. The academic figures that you saw of the statue, of the live model, that's all that training. So is it different than a photograph? Yeah. So you can create and design images that you might not be able to do with a photograph. Could you hire actors and set a scene? Yes, you could do that. But it's so that you can create work that's got a higher purpose to it. I would say that that's one of the biggest oppositional standpoints. And I mean, personally also, the process of making it is wonderful. For anybody who's taken a live drawing class from a model, they kind of, for me with my students, I see that as soon as they transition from beginning drawing to figure drawing, they kind of fall in love with it. And there's very little going back after that. That the process of studying realism, the euphoria you feel when you get it right are things that change you as an artist and draw people further into it. And they just kind of keep developing as artists. So what's the difference between, you know, photography and art? Another one is that, well, we want to do it. We want to paint. We think that there's something glorious that our eye can see that maybe the camera can't really bring out. You can bring out life. You can bring out the soul with paint, and it's always trying to suss out some other element of truth or beauty or message that you can bring out that you think is most appropriate with painting or sculpture that is not with photography. And vice versa. There are things you can do with photography that you can't do with the painting.
Definitely. It's interesting to see these two, on the surface level, kind of similar concepts, you know, how much nuance and variation there is in them. We have more questions here. How does Impressionism fit into this kind of schema you've presented here of like abstract versus realism?
Yeah. Talked about and thought about this a lot. So 1850, so at the time of the academies, when people like Bougierau and who's the guy, Bonnet and Jerome are the hottest artists of the era. They're the most famous worldwide known artists doing portraits, and they're the most prestigious out there. We have our Impressionists getting off the ground. And certainly some of them were trained in the academy. Most of them had a realistic and classically trained background to them, like Seurat, for instance. And they're also starting to get off the ground with Impressionism. You know, whether it's Monet or it's Van Gogh, Seurat, all these people, they're taking it kind of like, I would describe it a half step away from realism. And the subjects are taken from inside the studio to outside the studio, in the fields, looking at the lilies of the field, looking at these exterior scenes and kind of drawing inspiration from those areas in particular and getting fascinated with the brush stroke, things like that. So in Impressionism, at first the Impressionists were like hated and despised and, oh my gosh, these guys suck. They were hated in the art world. And then they became what was lauded in the art world. And that became kind of the new academic pursuit and standard. So where does Impressionism fall in that? Impressionism really kind of paved the way for the modern art movements that we have today. It's like I said, it was a half step away from realism. We still have depictions of the subject. It looks like with the thing you're painting, whether it's the portrait or it's the lilies or it's the haystacks, it looks like these things. But like we all know with Impressionism, you get closer and then you see the technical, you see the brush strokes, you see the process behind it. And so it's kind of like that microscope analogy. You've got the big picture, and then Impressionism kind of like zooms in a little bit on it. And then we're zooming in a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more until we get more and more abstract. We've got people like Pollock, we've got de Kooning and such taking it over from there. So that's kind of where it falls in there. So it's in the timeline, as it were.
Yeah. I also was personally curious. I believe earlier it was mentioned you had at least a focus or an interest in like a kind of a spiritual kind of like topic in art, like portrayal of spiritual subjects and things in the matter. And with your focus in contemporary realism, you know, we're all very familiar, I think, just popularly, the contribution of Renaissance era art and like that, you know, they're very bombastic depictions of these, you know, grand historical religious events. How do you think that kind of focus is examined through the lens of contemporary realism? Yeah.
So I think the biggest kind of thing that got passed down from the Renaissance would be the technical things that they did as well. So for instance, the anatomy studies that people like Michelangelo and Da Vinci pioneered with looking into the cadavers, with doing their studies of the bones, of the muscles, all that kind of stuff. A lot of that got passed down and were like kind of source of inspiration for the 19th century academies, which are starting to kind of, and even by Michelangelo, we were starting to transition over into humanism from there. So like, yeah, we got our bombastic figures, but alongside themes of Christianity, you also see the themes of Greek mythology very much, because it's not just about Hercules, it's not just about Hades and Persephone, it's about the larger theme at work there, about why we have spring, about the message of there has to be death in order for new life. These things that are not just this mythological figure. Yeah, I read that story as a kid, is the larger theme at work that is fundamental to humanity, that has a philosophy that's actually impactful for people. So biblical themes, Greek mythology themes, whether you see it with Michelangelo, you see it with Bougierau, you see those kind of ideas side by side. And the whole point of that is that there's a greater theme at work, whether you ascribe to that, to a particular belief system or not. It's that kind of idea that there is this larger message about the human race that's really kind of driving the work forward. So the academic study is to help you then go on and make these significant works that have more of that message. So I hope that that kind of answers that a little bit.
Do you think this kind of contemporary realism aspect of it helps to kind of create a more relatable, like attainable idea of some of these like events? Because some of the depictions, like classically, they're so, they're so awe-inspiring, but they feel almost intentionally so
Right.
like beyond human understanding. But like, do you think this kind of contemporary realism aspect kind of brings it to a more personal, intimate level?
Yeah, I do personally. And I was trying to think of a good example to kind of go along with that, like a school or an institution I know. Yes, exactly. So there's this artist I follow. His name is Cody Swanson. He's a sculptor. He's the chair of the Sacred Art Academy in Florence, Italy. He studied at the Florence Academy of Art, and now he's a sculpture department chair of this academy. And so he does sacred work. And so with his work, he's got some pieces that are very much, they look like they're kind of high Renaissance with the things. And then he's got other pieces that are kind of bring it to this very relatable piece, especially where he's got figures of Adam and Eve. And the one of Eve, she looks like a woman that I would have bumped into today. And that's someone I would have met. And the expression of kind of anguish on her face, it kind of references some of these classical themes of art, but takes it to this place of very much, I would argue, contemporary understanding. Like I said, she looks like a woman that I could bump into, that I would recognize on the street. And I think that those elements of realism versus idealism do make it something that's more relatable, or something that feels alive today. I hope that kind of answers that question. I'm sure I'll think of other examples of people I feel like that do that nicely.
Probably right before you're about to fall asleep, like just the classic move.
Exactly.
We have another question from Charles. That's what do you think of the criticism that academic realism is kitsch?
Kitsch. I would say it's small-minded, to be honest. I would say it's kind of taking it at a well, I haven't really heard that of people arguing that contemporary realism by itself is kitsch. I've heard it in the sacred context, though. So I've heard it very much as anyone who wants to make religious art. I've kind of personally, I've gotten like the eye rolls of like, oh, I've seen that before. Really, you're just going to be like pumping out like molds of baby Jesus? Like, how boring is it? It's kind of the criticism that I've heard. And again, I think it's closed-minded, and I think it's not very in touch with what really is very popular. I've found that for myself and for the vast majority of my contemporaries, that the kind of work that their clients want, that they want to do themselves and actually makes them successful as artists, is realism. And it's not necessarily the kind of abstract themes or political statements that are pushed upon them in the academic spheres. And there's kind of, that's not necessarily wanted by people. So I think to be completely honest, I think academies do a disservice to students by discouraging that kind of philosophy. But the good news is there are plenty of schools that will help them to achieve it, like your Grand Central Atelier, like your Florence Academy of Art, and or other places like that.
And I think earlier another question was asked that can kind of help elaborate maybe from the contemporary realist side a little more about like why that critique might seem maybe small-minded. They ask if you could talk about the relationship between craft and concept in contemporary realism, and basically how essential is craft in conveying an idea, and how necessary is it?
Right. And I think that question is really critical. I think it drives the biggest difference between realism and other what's kind of considered today to be academic work. The stuff that's kind of pushed is that at a university today, the concept is the driving force behind that. And craftsmanship is kind of, it's important, it's needed, but it is less emphasized. So they'll take like a quarter of the time teaching you the craftsmanship and just kind of hope that students get it so that they can communicate their concept. Versus anything with contemporary realism is focused on, no, let's get you your craft so we can teach you this so you have all the skills necessary to communicate your message. And so that question by itself is kind of the biggest difference, driving wedge between contemporary realism and a lot of abstract artists. Most abstract artists I know, though, have a lot of technical chops, so that's kind of, take that for what it's worth there. I guess you could say conceptual artists. So with contemporary realism, the idea is that your craftsmanship will help you better with your philosophy. And through the pursuit of refining your craftsmanship, of your academic studies, you will also further clarify your own artistic vision through study that you're going to learn a lot as it is. So let me try and think if there's anything else with that question to answer. What's the relationship between craft and concept?
How necessary do you think it is?
Yeah, how necessary. And so like I said, that question itself is very different. Can you try hard and communicate your message without having a lot of technical training or something? Yes, absolutely. And it depends on the message. For instance, performance artists, maybe they aren't the best at drawing, but if they're making a performance piece and they're performing that in galleries, or they're recording it and putting it out on social media or something like that, have the opportunity to make a very, very powerful message. And then their craftsmanship takes on a very, very different look to a painter, for instance. For me personally, as someone who would aspire towards, is strongly influenced by realism, you could say, I think the craftsmanship is paramount, and I rely on it heavily every single day to communicate better my messages. For my commissions, when I sit down, I rely on my practice. I rely on the hours and hours and hours of figure drawing and anatomy and practice that I've done. Before I had that, there are other ways of kind of helping. I would hire models. I would use a lot of photographs, things like that. But the better I get as an artist, the better, with my technical training, I should say, the better my concepts and the better my professional work becomes. So it is very much a philosophical question and difference there. And I think that's kind of the biggest difference between these contemporary realist institutions and academic institutions is, no, we're going to help you and we're going to teach you how to really refine your concept, versus the contemporary realists are like, whatever your concept is, we're just going to give you the technical chops to communicate it even better.
No, I think that's wonderful. I think it this whole presentation and certainly a lot of the questions answered here have kind of illuminated, a lot of us, I think, or at least a lot of people who maybe aren't that familiar with the movement, the genre, rather the movement. They have a tendency to kind of see the more broad strokes of it. They think of it maybe as a more mechanical kind of recreation. And I think this really illuminates a lot of the heart, the philosophy at the core of the movement. And I think that's really wonderful. I think we've taken Most of the questions here, we've spent about half an hour on it, so I think I would like to just ask if there's any kind of final words you have for all of the people watching tonight.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, kind of the, like you say, the versus the mechanical aspect of contemporary realism. Right. And frankly, I think it should start with the mechanical aspect. And that's the point of all this kind of stuff, is get your mechanics down. It's sort of like the grammar and syntax, is that no one's going to listen to your statement or your message if you've got a typo in the first sentence. At least that's when I shut off and I say, I'm not reading the rest of this article. So it's the same sort of deal with art, is that if you've got some technical abilities, then you're going to be able to make some really, really excellent art. I think every artist should get some technical training, because if it doesn't, it might not stop there. Whether you're Seurat, whether you're Picasso, whether you're any kind of contemporary artist, whether you're Giacometti, whether even Duchamp, your message will be relevant because you've kind of done the hard work and gotten some technical training behind you. And I think you also see a flip-flop. People who start out abstract kind of migrate over and become realistic. And then a lot of realists I know, all the way up to Rembrandt even, by the end of their life, their strokes are getting a lot looser. So I think abstract and realism kind of goes hand in hand. And I was going to say this about abstract expressionism earlier, and I want to say it now, I think, is that I like abstract expressionism. I really do. I love Jackson Pollock. It was one of my first loves as a painter. As a kid, I was all about him. And I was like, and I could identify him as like, this is my guy. And I love the energy of the activity in it, the sense it gives me. And it's something I'll always love. Even as a contemporary realist, I can't not love Jackson Pollock, and I can't not love Picasso. Like big, big hearts around these guys. But I mean, I love abstract, and I started out very much abstract with my own work before I fell deeply in love with the human body. I still do abstract. I do abstract paintings. I'll do abstract ceramic pieces. And I think that there's a big need for that and a place for that in people's hearts and in the world today. And I think it's very telling that as soon as people start to create art, one of the things that they want to do and do immediately is abstract. That being said, I don't really think abstract art exists, to be honest. I don't think, and because nothing is ever made up. It sounds crazy, but human beings, it's physically impossible to create something out of nothing. If you've ever taken a physics class, you know this to be true. And art and physics and math and science are pretty much all wed. You know, this idea, oh, art and engineering, they're far apart. No, they're not. They're one and the same. It's a study of the physical world. So there we go. Anyways, it's physically impossible to create something out of nothing, or to draw. You're drawing it from somewhere. You didn't, just, it's not just, maybe it is osmosis, but it's not like you conjured it out of nothing. So does abstract art actually exist, or is it a different kind of representation? Kind of like the microscope analogy. Can you zoom in on an organism to point of seeing at a microscopic level, instead of seeing a cellular composition instead of the bigger picture? So, I mean, these are interesting questions. These are the kinds of things I chew on that keep me up at night as an artist, that I think are worth studying and thinking about. So, yeah.
I think it's great. I think it speaks a lot to the complexity of art. I think it speaks a lot to the complexity of people who are the makers of art. So I think that's a wonderful sentiment. I'd like to take this time to thank everybody who joined us tonight. We really appreciate you all making the time to be here. We hope you really enjoyed this talk. I know I did. Like I said, this program will be available on RHPL's website and on our YouTube page in about 1 week. You can look forward to another wonderful presentation brought to you by PCCA again on August 11th. So be sure to register for that at calendar.rhpl.org. And as mentioned, this was brought to you by the Painters Creek Center for the Arts. And before we go, just you mentioned it in the show. If anybody is interested in taking classes, do you have any info on where they can get started with that?
Yeah, Paint Creek Center for the Arts website. And You can find my name, Mary Dudek. I do a Monday 9 to noon class, a Saturday 3 to 6 class, all figure drawing and painting. And then there's a teen figure study class. But there are a lot of great realism classes. Now Charles has got some wonderful, wonderful classes. But Pink Creek serves a lot of needs in this community. So if you're looking for something, chances are Pink Creek has got it. So go on their website, look around at their catalog, and see it. And thanks, and I just want to say thank you for everyone who came in. The questions are really stimulating. If you have other stuff you want to ask me about or throw at me, feel free to shoot me an email and stuff. I'd love to keep talking.
Awesome. Well, with that, I will say thank you all again for joining, and I hope you all have a great night. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.